In my decades within the walls of Parliament, I have witnessed how the most well-intentioned efforts to achieve perfect equality often produce the most perfect tyranny. This observation troubles many who assume that freedom and equality must advance together, hand in hand, towards some imagined paradise of human perfection. Yet experience teaches us a different lesson, one that challenges our most cherished assumptions about justice and liberty. The French revolutionaries proclaimed equality as their sacred principle, yet delivered the terror. They promised to level all distinctions, yet created the most absolute despotism Europe had witnessed in centuries. Meanwhile, England, with its ancient inequalities of rank and property, preserved liberties that continental Europe lost in pursuit of abstract equality. This apparent contradiction reveals what I call Burke's paradox. Sometimes inequality, when properly ordered within traditional institutions, serves as the guardian of freedom itself. Consider how natural hierarchies, those arising from talent, virtue, industry, and providence, often protect the weak better than artificial equalities imposed by revolutionary force. The question before us is not whether inequality exists, it always has and always will, but whether we shall permit it to develop organically within constitutional bounds, or allow demagogues to weaponize resentment against it, ultimately destroying both freedom and the very people they claim to champion. True political wisdom lies not in eliminating all distinctions, but in ensuring that legitimate authority serves the common good. Chapter 1: The Natural Origins of Social Hierarchy. Human society, like nature itself, abhors perfect uniformity. From my earliest observations in the Irish Parliament to my mature reflections on the British Constitution, I have seen that attempts to force equality upon naturally unequal beings produce not justice, but chaos. Men differ in strength, intelligence, virtue, industry, and countless other qualities. These differences, rather than being defects to be corrected, form the very foundation upon which civilization builds its magnificent edifice. When God distributed his gifts among mankind, he did not consult the philosophers of equality. Some received greater talents for leadership, others for craftsmanship, still others for contemplation or commerce. These natural inequalities, when allowed to flourish within proper moral bounds, create the division of labor and specialization that lifts entire societies from barbarism to prosperity. The farmer feeds the philosopher guides the statesman protects the farmer, each according to his gifts, all serving the whole. But observe what happens when revolutionary zealots attempt to erase these natural distinctions. In France, I watched as they guillotined the skilled alongside the unskilled, the virtuous alongside the vicious, reducing all to the same level, the level of the grave. Their abstract principle of equality demanded that the wisdom of experience bow before the ignorance of the mob, that property accumulated through generations of prudent stewardship be redistributed to those who had not learned its proper use. The British system, by contrast, acknowledges hierarchy while binding it to duty. Our nobility inherit privilege, yes, but they also inherit obligations, to serve in Parliament, to lead in war, to patronize learning and arts, to care for their tenants and localities. When the Duke takes his seat in the Lords, he does not merely claim rights, he accepts responsibilities that common men need not bear. This creates what I call inequality with accountability, a system where greater privilege demands greater service to the common good. Such organic hierarchy differs fundamentally from the arbitrary tyranny that emerges when revolutionaries destroy traditional institutions. Natural inequality, channeled through constitutional forms, produces leaders who have been educated for responsibility and whose interests align with the welfare of those they govern. Revolutionary equality, imposed by force, produces only demagogues whose power rests on perpetual popular passion and whose interests lie in maintaining the very chaos that elevated them. The paradox resolves itself when we understand that freedom requires not the absence of all authority, but the presence of legitimate authority, authority that arises naturally from superior virtue and wisdom, that exercises itself within constitutional limits, and that remains accountable to both God and tradition for its stewardship of power. Chapter 2: Why Revolutionary Equality Destroys Freedom. The French Revolution began with the noblest proclamations about the rights of man and the equality of all citizens. Yet within a few short years, it produced the most absolute despotism that Europe had witnessed since the darkest ages of tyranny. This transformation was not accidental, it was inevitable. When men attempt to build society upon the abstract principle of perfect equality, they must use revolutionary violence to suppress every natural distinction, and this violence, once unleashed, recognizes no limits. Consider the logic that drove the Jacobins from their initial moderate demands to the Terror. If all men are truly equal, then any difference in outcome must result from injustice or conspiracy. The rich man's wealth becomes proof of his crimes against the poor. The educated man's knowledge becomes evidence of his participation in schemes to deceive the ignorant. The religious man's faith becomes a threat to rational equality. Every excellence, every achievement, every manifestation of human diversity stands as an accusation against the revolutionary principle. To maintain their fiction of equality, the revolutionaries must continuously identify and destroy new enemies. Today they execute the aristocrats, tomorrow the bourgeoisie, next week the insufficiently radical revolutionaries themselves. The logic of leveling admits no stopping point, for human nature itself rebels against perfect uniformity. Each new manifestation of natural inequality becomes a crisis requiring more extreme measures, more comprehensive surveillance, more total control. But the deeper problem lies in the very concept of revolutionary equality itself. True equality, equality before God and under law, requires no violence to establish, for it simply recognizes what already exists in the moral order. Revolutionary equality, by contrast, demands the violent reconstruction of human nature itself. Since men will not naturally accept perfect uniformity, it must be imposed upon them by ever more powerful instruments of coercion. The revolutionaries discovered that to make all men equal, they must first make all men slaves. Only under the most complete despotism could natural inequalities be successfully suppressed. The state that promises to liberate mankind from all distinctions must ultimately control every aspect of human life, property, family, religion, even thought itself. Perfect equality requires perfect tyranny. Meanwhile, observe how traditional inequalities, properly ordered, actually protect freedom. The English gentleman's privilege to sit in Parliament is balanced by his obligation to defend the realm. The merchant's right to accumulate property is limited by his duty to employ it productively and charitably. The clergyman's authority to teach is constrained by his responsibility to holy doctrine and moral example. Each inequality carries with it corresponding duties that prevent the accumulation of arbitrary power. These traditional arrangements create what we might call competitive inequalities, different orders checking and balancing each other, preventing any single group from achieving absolute dominance. The nobility restrains the democracy restrains the nobility, the clergy reminds both of their duties to divine law, and the whole system maintains space for individual freedom within an ordered framework. Revolutionary equality, promising to free mankind from all oppression, delivers instead the most complete oppression imaginable, oppression without the moderating influence of tradition, religion, or competing authorities. It creates not freedom, but uniformity, not justice, but terror, not prosperity, but the equality of universal poverty. Chapter 3: The Philosophy of Natural Hierarchy and Representation. Throughout my parliamentary career, I have maintained that true representation requires more than the mere mechanical aggregation of popular will. The representative serves not as a delegate bound to echo every passing passion of his constituents, but as a trustee exercising his best judgment for their long-term welfare. This distinction becomes crucial when we consider how natural hierarchies can enhance rather than diminish genuine democratic representation. The man of superior education, broader experience, and deeper reflection possesses advantages that enable him to see beyond the immediate interests that necessarily occupy most citizens in their daily struggles. The farmer cannot spend his days studying the complex relationships between nations. The merchant cannot devote his nights to mastering the principles of jurisprudence. The laborer cannot sacrifice his earnings to travel and observe the workings of different governments. Yet all benefit when some men are freed from these immediate pressures to develop the knowledge and judgment required for wise governance. This is why I have always defended what critics call virtual representation, the idea that a man of proven wisdom can legitimately represent the interests of those who did not directly elect him, because his superior understanding enables him to perceive their true needs better than they themselves might. The Yorkshire freeholder who elects me to Parliament does not merely choose someone to voice his particular prejudices, he chooses someone educated and experienced enough to discern what policies will truly serve Yorkshire's welfare in the complex web of national and international affairs. Such representation becomes impossible under revolutionary democracy, which reduces politics to the direct expression of immediate popular desires. When every distinction of learning, experience, and reflection is stigmatized as undemocratic privilege, when representatives become mere echo chambers for constituency opinion, the result is not enhanced freedom but the tyranny of temporary majorities driven by passion rather than reason. Let me illustrate this principle through my own experience with the American colonial crisis. The popular opinion in many English constituencies favored harsh measures against the rebellious colonists. A mere delegate would have voted to punish America regardless of the long-term consequences. But I understood, through study and reflection unavailable to most of my constituents, that American liberty and British liberty were fundamentally connected, that we could not preserve freedom at home while destroying it abroad. My position initially appeared to contradict the will of those who elected me. Yet time proved that my undemocratic stance better served their true interests than blind obedience to their temporary prejudices would have done. This is the essence of trusteeship representation, using superior advantages not to aggrandize oneself, but to serve the common good more effectively than direct democracy could achieve. Natural hierarchy in representation means that those with greater gifts bear greater responsibilities. The educated man who seeks office accepts the obligation to use his learning for public benefit. The experienced leader commits himself to think beyond his own immediate interests. The man of property dedicates his independence to serve those who lack such freedom from economic pressure. When properly functioning, this system produces what I call aristocratic democracy, government by the best, chosen through democratic processes, accountable to democratic institutions, but exercising their superior faculties for the common welfare. The alternative, pure democratic equality, reduces governance to the lowest common denominator of popular passion and prejudice. Consider how natural intellectual and moral inequalities actually enhance democratic representation. When constituents select their ablest fellow citizens for office, they multiply their own political effectiveness. When they defer to superior wisdom in complex matters while retaining ultimate control through elections, they achieve better outcomes than direct democracy could provide. True democratic freedom lies not in eliminating all distinctions of capacity and judgment, but in ensuring that superior capacities serve rather than exploit the common good. Chapter 4: Property, Privilege, and the Protection of the Weak. Few propositions appear more self-evident to the revolutionary mind than that private property creates inequality, and inequality destroys freedom. Yet my experience in Parliament, particularly during the debates over Indian affairs and the investigation of Warren Hastings, has taught me that properly ordered property rights often provide the most effective protection for those whom reformers claim to champion. The destruction of property rights, undertaken in equality's name, typically delivers the poor and weak into the hands of whoever wields political power. Consider first the relationship between property and independence. The man who owns land, tools, or accumulated savings possesses something that cannot easily be taken from him by political pressure. He can speak his mind in the market square without fear that his employer will discharge him. He can vote according to conscience rather than economic necessity. He can plan for the future and invest in improvements that benefit not only himself but his community. Property, in short, creates the independence that makes genuine political freedom possible. When revolutionaries attack property rights in the name of equality, they destroy this foundation of independence. The farmer whose land is confiscated must now depend entirely upon political authorities for permission to eat. The merchant whose goods are nationalized must curry favor with bureaucrats for permission to trade. The craftsman whose tools are collectivized must conform his thoughts to official doctrine to continue practicing his trade. Revolutionary equality reduces all citizens to the condition of dependent clients, entirely subject to political power. But property serves an even more crucial function in protecting the weak against the strong. Throughout my parliamentary career, I have observed that established property rights create predictable rules that even the powerful must observe. When property can be taken only through due process of law, when contracts must be honored, when inheritance follows established procedures, then even the humblest citizen enjoys protection against arbitrary force. The English system of primogeniture, so despised by egalitarian theorists, actually illustrates this principle. By ensuring that great estates pass intact to eldest sons, we preserve concentrations of independent wealth that can resist royal favor or popular passion. The great landowner who inherits rather than accumulates his wealth possesses independence that makes him formidable to any government that overreaches its proper bounds. His privilege becomes the nation's protection against despotism. Moreover, established property creates what I call chains of obligation that bind the wealthy to care for their dependents. The landlord who inherits estates also inherits responsibilities to maintain employment for tenants, to support local churches and schools, to provide leadership in times of crisis. These obligations are not merely legal but social and moral, embedded in traditions that make neglect shameful and beneficence honorable. Revolutionary redistribution destroys these protective relationships. When property changes hands through political confiscation rather than inheritance or voluntary exchange, the new owners feel no traditional obligations to their dependents. Political commissars who control redistributed lands serve the state that appointed them, not the people who work the soil. Temporary administrators of confiscated wealth think only of extracting maximum immediate benefit, not of maintaining long-term productive relationships. The paradox becomes clear: inequality of property, properly ordered within traditional institutions, protects the weak better than political equality achieved through confiscation. The established landlord knows that his family's reputation and future depend upon treating tenants fairly. The political official who controls redistributed property faces no such constraints. His advancement depends upon pleasing his superiors, not serving those beneath him. Even more fundamentally, secure property rights create the prosperity that makes genuine charity possible. The wealthy man who has accumulated riches through productive enterprise can afford to be generous. The revolutionary official who controls confiscated wealth must hoard it to maintain his political position. Traditional inequality produces surplus that can be shared. Revolutionary equality produces scarcity that must be rationed. This is why I have consistently argued that the protection of property rights serves not the narrow interests of the wealthy, but the broad interests of society, including its weakest members. Stable property creates employment, enables investment, provides security for savings, and generates the surplus that supports education, charity, and cultural advancement. Its destruction impoverishes everyone while concentrating unprecedented power in the hands of those who control the redistributive machinery. Chapter 5: Religion, Hierarchy, and the moral order. No institution more clearly demonstrates the protective power of hierarchy than the established church, yet none faces more persistent attack from those who mistake equality for justice. Throughout my parliamentary service, I have defended the Church of England not from narrow sectarian prejudice, but from deep conviction that religious establishment provides essential moral foundation for both legitimate authority and genuine freedom. A society that destroys religious hierarchy in pursuit of secular equality soon discovers that it has demolished the very source of the moral restraints that make free government possible. The established church serves first as a moral educator of the people, teaching duties as well as rights, obligations as well as liberties. When the Archbishop of Canterbury speaks from his cathedral, he addresses not merely his immediate congregation but the entire nation, reminding all, from the lowest subject to the highest minister, of their accountability to divine law. This religious authority, precisely because it operates independent of political power, provides essential moral constraint upon those who govern temporal affairs. Consider how religious hierarchy actually protects religious freedom rather than destroying it. The established church, secure in its position, can afford to tolerate dissent because it faces no existential threat from minority opinions. The Methodists and Quakers and Catholics, knowing that established authority respects legal limits, can practice their faiths without fear of persecution. But when revolutionary governments attack all religious authority equally, they create conditions where religious minorities must either submit to state orthodoxy or face annihilation. The French experience proves this point decisively. Revolutionary equality demanded the destruction of the Catholic Church's privileged position, promising freedom for all religious opinions. Yet within a few years, the same revolutionaries were drowning priests in the Loire River and forcing citizens to worship the goddess of reason. When transcendent religious authority disappears, political authority recognizes no limits upon its power to control conscience. Religious establishment also provides what I call competing authority, power structures independent of the state that can resist governmental overreach. When the king claims absolute authority, the archbishop can invoke divine law to restrain him. When parliament assumes unlimited power, established clergy can appeal to moral principles that transcend positive law. This separation of temporal and spiritual authority creates the institutional competition that preserves freedom within both spheres. The revolutionary attack upon religious hierarchy stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of equality itself. True equality, the equality of all souls before God, actually requires hierarchical religious authority to protect it against political manipulation. The established bishop who denounces injustice does so from moral authority that no earthly power granted and none can revoke. His privilege serves not his personal aggrandizement but the preservation of moral standards that protect the humble against the mighty. Moreover, religious establishment creates moral incentives for virtuous leadership throughout society. The nobleman who knows he will answer to God for his stewardship of privilege faces restraints that no earthly constitution could provide. The merchant who believes divine justice will judge his treatment of employees and customers operates within moral boundaries that mere legal regulation cannot establish. The magistrate who understands himself as God's deputy in dispensing justice exercises power with humility that secular authority rarely achieves. When revolutionary equality destroys religious authority, it eliminates these internal moral restraints, leaving only external political force to control human behavior. The result is not greater freedom but more complete tyranny, since political power must expand to fill the moral vacuum left by religion's destruction. Citizens who no longer fear divine judgment must be controlled by human surveillance. Leaders who acknowledge no transcendent authority must be constrained by increasingly complex legal mechanisms. The paradox resolves itself when we recognize that religious hierarchy, properly understood, serves universal human dignity rather than privileged interests. The established church that teaches all souls equality before God provides more effective protection for human worth than secular equality imposed by political force. Its moral authority restrains earthly power more effectively than constitutional mechanisms alone can achieve. This is why attacks upon religious establishment, however well-intentioned, ultimately undermine the very equality they claim to promote. A society that destroys the moral foundations of legitimate authority must rely increasingly upon naked force to maintain order, and force recognizes no equality except the equality of subjugation. Chapter 6: Imperial Wisdom, Governing Diversity Through Hierarchy. My long involvement in imperial affairs, from defending American colonial rights to investigating abuses in India, has taught me that legitimate authority must accommodate natural diversity rather than imposing artificial uniformity. The British Empire at its best has demonstrated how hierarchical governance can preserve local freedoms and cultural distinctions better than revolutionary equality ever could. This imperial experience reveals principles applicable far beyond questions of colonial administration. When I rose in Parliament to defend American colonial privileges, I argued not for separation but for the preservation of ancient English liberties within an imperial framework that respected colonial particularities. The Americans had developed their own assemblies, their own legal traditions, their own ways of managing local affairs. These differences did not threaten imperial unity, they strengthened it by allowing each part of the empire to contribute its distinctive excellences to the common good. The fatal error of successive British ministries lay in their attempt to impose perfect uniformity upon naturally diverse societies. When Lord North's government demanded that Americans accept the same taxation system applied in Britain, they ignored fundamental differences in colonial circumstances, traditions, and capabilities. This administrative equality, pursued for the sake of theoretical consistency, destroyed the practical liberty that had made the empire both prosperous and stable. Consider how the principle applies to Indian governance. The East India Company's worst abuses arose not from respecting Indian hierarchy and custom, but from attempting to impose European administrative equality upon societies organized according to different principles. When Warren Hastings and his associates treated ancient Indian institutions as mere obstacles to efficient exploitation, they destroyed the traditional restraints that had protected ordinary Indians for centuries. Wise imperial governance requires what I call hierarchical federalism, central authority strong enough to coordinate diverse parts, local authority sufficient to preserve particular traditions and interests. The imperial parliament provides overall direction and common defense. Colonial assemblies manage local affairs according to local wisdom. Each level of authority operates within its proper sphere, neither eliminating the other nor attempting to duplicate its functions. This arrangement protects diversity more effectively than revolutionary equality could achieve. When the central authority respects local hierarchies and customs, it creates space for different societies to flourish according to their own genius. When it attempts to impose uniform equality everywhere, it must destroy every local particularity that resists standardization. The American crisis demonstrated both the promise and the perils of imperial hierarchy. When imperial authority operated through existing colonial institutions, respecting American legal traditions while providing common defense and commercial coordination, the system served both imperial and colonial interests. When imperial authority attempted direct administration, bypassing colonial assemblies and imposing uniform taxation, it generated the resistance that ultimately destroyed imperial unity. My advocacy for American rights was never mere sentimental attachment to colonial complaints. I understood that imperial authority depends upon consent, and consent requires respect for the particular traditions and interests of those governed. An empire that destroys local liberties in pursuit of administrative efficiency will soon find itself governing only ruins. The same principle applies to domestic governance. A nation is like an empire in miniature, different regions, different economic interests, different social arrangements, all requiring coordination without uniformity. The Yorkshire farmer and the London merchant, the Scottish Highlander and the Irish Catager, all owe allegiance to the same crown, but they cannot be governed by identical methods without destroying the diversity that makes the nation strong. Revolutionary equality attempts to solve the problem of diversity by eliminating it, reducing all regions to the same condition, all citizens to the same status, all institutions to the same form. But diversity eliminated is strength destroyed. The nation that forces uniformity upon its parts becomes weaker, not stronger, more fragmented, not more unified. Hierarchical governance preserves diversity by providing framework within which different groups can maintain their distinctive characters while contributing to common purposes. The parliament that respects county traditions while providing national leadership creates genuine unity without uniformity. The crown that honors ancient privileges while exercising sovereign authority achieves stability without stagnation. This imperial wisdom applies beyond formal governmental arrangements to all institutions that must coordinate diverse elements. The church that accommodates local customs within universal doctrine, the university that preserves different colleges within common academic standards, the trading company that allows local adaptation within general commercial principles, all demonstrate how hierarchy can preserve and protect diversity rather than destroying it. The alternative, revolutionary equality imposed by central authority, creates not genuine unity but artificial uniformity maintained by force. Such systems inevitably generate resistance from every natural diversity they attempt to suppress, producing more conflict than the hierarchical arrangements they replace. Chapter 7: Applying Burkean Wisdom to Contemporary American Challenges. The American constitutional system, properly understood, represents perhaps the most successful application of conservative principles to popular government ever achieved. Yet contemporary Americans often misunderstand their own founding, mistaking it for revolutionary democracy rather than the prudent adaptation of British constitutional wisdom to New World circumstances. Understanding this distinction becomes crucial as America faces new challenges that threaten both its freedoms and its unity. The founders were students of British constitutional development, not French revolutionary theory. When they established federal government with limited enumerated powers, they applied my principle that authority should be distributed among competing institutions rather than concentrated in popular assemblies. When they created an independent judiciary and presidential executive, they recognized that genuine representation requires more than direct democracy. When they protected property rights and religious freedom, they understood that some inequalities serve equality's deeper purposes. Consider how American federalism embodies the hierarchical principles I defended in imperial affairs. The Constitution creates what I would call vertical competition between state and federal authority, each checking the other's tendency toward overreach. States serve as laboratories for different approaches to governance, preserving the diversity that makes the Union strong. Federal authority provides coordination and common defense without destroying local self-government. This arrangement protects minorities more effectively than national majority rule could achieve. The religious dissenter finds refuge in states that welcome his faith. The economic innovator discovers regulatory environments suited to his enterprise. The cultural minority preserves its traditions within friendly communities. Federal uniformity, imposed in equality's name, would destroy this protective diversity. Yet contemporary Americans increasingly misunderstand their system, demanding direct democracy where the founders provided representative government, immediate equality where they established gradual improvement, federal solutions where they intended state responsibility. This confusion stems partly from forgetting the conservative wisdom embedded in American institutions. The American Senate illustrates how traditional inequality can serve democratic purposes. By giving each state equal representation regardless of population, the Constitution creates artificial equality that protects real diversity. Wyoming's equal voice with California ensures that governance reflects geographical and cultural variety, not merely numerical majorities. This undemocratic arrangement actually makes American democracy more representative by preventing coastal urbanization from overwhelming interior agricultural interests. Similarly, the Electoral College embodies federal principles that revolutionary democracy would destroy. Presidential candidates must appeal to diverse regional coalitions rather than simply maximizing votes in population centers. This system encourages political parties to represent geographical and cultural breadth rather than concentrated demographic intensity. The inequality of individual votes across different states serves the higher equality of ensuring that all regions have meaningful voice in presidential selection. Contemporary attacks on these institutions typically invoke abstract equality against practical wisdom. Critics demand direct popular vote for president, proportional representation in the Senate, elimination of judicial review, all in the name of pure democracy. Yet these reforms would concentrate power in temporary majorities while destroying the institutional competition that protects liberty. The challenge facing contemporary America resembles the challenge I faced regarding imperial governance: how to maintain unity among diverse parts without destroying the diversity that makes union valuable. Revolutionary equality offers a false solution: impose uniformity through centralized power. Conservative wisdom suggests a different approach: preserve diversity through federal arrangements that allow different communities to govern themselves according to their own values while participating in common national purposes. This applies beyond formal governmental structures to civil society itself. The inequality between Harvard and community colleges serves educational diversity. The inequality between Main Street businesses and multinational corporations serves economic variety. The inequality between established churches and upstart denominations serves religious freedom. Attempting to eliminate these inequalities would impoverish American life without advancing genuine equality. American constitutional wisdom lies in understanding that ordered liberty requires both equality and hierarchy: equality of fundamental rights and dignity, hierarchy of function and responsibility. The citizen and the senator, the private and the general, the student and the professor are equal in their humanity but unequal in their roles. This differentiation of function within unity of purpose creates the social complexity that makes free government possible. The alternative, revolutionary equality that eliminates all distinctions, would reduce American diversity to uniformity, American federalism to centralization, American liberty to the equality of universal subjugation. Such democratic reforms would destroy the very constitutional wisdom that has made America the most successful representative government in human history. Conclusion. The paradox I have explored throughout these reflections resolves itself when we abandon the false opposition between equality and hierarchy, recognizing instead that legitimate inequality often serves equality's deepest purposes. Natural differences in talent, virtue, and circumstance create the diversity that makes civilized life possible. Artificial equality, imposed by revolutionary force, destroys this diversity while concentrating unprecedented power in the hands of those who control the equalizing machinery. True political wisdom lies not in eliminating all distinctions but in ensuring that legitimate authority serves the common good. The inequality that protects, through property rights, religious establishment, federal arrangements, and representative institutions, differs fundamentally from the inequality that exploits. One serves human dignity, the other destroys it. One creates space for freedom, the other eliminates it. The choice before every free society remains constant: shall we preserve the organic inequalities that protect liberty within traditional constitutional bounds, or shall we pursue the abstract equality that, in destroying all intermediate institutions, delivers every citizen defenseless into the hands of unlimited political power? History offers clear testimony about which path leads to freedom and which to tyranny. The task for prudent statesmen is not to choose between equality and hierarchy, but to ensure that hierarchical arrangements serve rather than subvert genuine human equality. This requires constant vigilance, gradual reform, and deep respect for the accumulated wisdom embedded in constitutional traditions. Such conservative prudence may seem less heroic than revolutionary transformation, yet it offers the only reliable path to preserving freedom for ourselves and our posterity.